Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Wrong Idea. In case you're unfamiliar, being wrong is about embracing subjective experience over objective truth. We're not interested in being correct. We just want to explore our own insights and opinions. I'm Jack, kicking it with my brother Lucas. What are we going into this week?
Well, I've been thinking about the role of AI in the workforce, and specifically how AI might take on some of our responsibilities, but there's been a lot of worry about AI completely replacing humans in the workforce, and I'm just curious to think through that a bit.
I always get people talking to me about this, and you're the first person to raise this sort of like hesitation towards that notion to me. And I've always been like, okay, I see both perspectives, yet to me, the more logical one has always been your stance on it, which is slightly more nuanced and a little more well thought out. And it's not so like, oh shit, AI is the end of the world, which seems to be a lot of the people that are thinking that it will just, completely take all of our jobs.
Well, so this is a good point because where I come from is this idea that looking back on previous technological revolutions or just anything that's happened where something game changing has come along, people tend to react very strongly as if it's going to be the end of life as we know it. And in some ways it is, but in other ways life just evolves and we move to the next stage. But this is not the first technological revolution where people have been afraid for their jobs, and it's a very real threat, but also I just tend to believe that human ingenuity will figure out how to use the additional bandwidth that artificial intelligence can give us to be more productive rather than thinking of it as humans will no longer have anything to do.
This makes me want to ask you because you were around when phones first became a thing. Were people having this sort of reaction about phones when they started to become a thing and the internet and it all started to become very commonplace? Was there similar concerns? I'm sure probably not the same, but were there similar concerns when that happened?
Well, I certainly wasn't around for the development of phones, but smartphones, yes.
Fair point.
I
Fair.
I did see. I don't think that the smartphone revolution was the kind of thing where people were like, this is going to impact the job market. The internet was certainly more like that, but also different. And I was still a bit young to like have really been thinking about those concerns at the time. Regardless, to your point, I think that what's different about the AI revolution here is the magnitude of the innovation. Like, what I mean is, we are dealing with something that certainly feels a lot, quote unquote, bigger than other revolutions we've had. It seems like it's absolutely going to replace all of the skills that humans are good at. You literally are talking about a technology that is measured by, is it better than most humans at most tasks?
It's such a curious thing to me because, in a way, I've always figured that one of the ways that I would enjoy using AI is to just like have it do all the busy work that I don't want to do. And I think for a lot of people, it's sort of just a method to cheat in school. I know that we were going to focus on the workforce, but school to me is sort of my workforce. And I think there's probably still some overlaps. People want to take the load off of their tedious jobs and have someone else do it for them. So it just seems to me as if its capabilities of doing the task which you don't want to do are even still or even so still suboptimal to what a human could produce, which has always made me curious as to why there's been such this massive overreaction and like drama and end of world like holy moly guacamole about this whole thing. It's always been curious to me. So it makes me wonder, because you and me have two completely demographics which we interact with. Why do you think that AI has had this big boom boom reaction that it could be some, catastrophic or cataclysmic thing.
Okay, so you ask a good question, and I think what you initially said there is I look at the stuff that these chatbots spit out, and it's cool, but like I'm not impressed, and that's what I'm hearing a little bit of, and I think that that's a very very fair stance to have. Like I'm impressed, but am I really like? I'll be perfectly honest with you. I try to use these things pretty regularly to offload some work, and more recently, I find that tasks that I feel like these technologies should be able to handle relatively easily, they still struggle with. And so I get that sentiment of like this is what's going to take over the world, and you have to then think about the idea of exponential growth and the idea that you're right. Like these things today, I'm not really that scared. But what about the incarnation of this thing 5 years from now? 10 years from now? Does that start to get scary? You start to think about how much more advanced these things are even than they were 1 year ago, 2 years ago. And you wonder, like again, you try to project that forward, and our human minds tend to only do that linearly, but we need to do that exponentially. And so the question is, if we can't if we keep going at the pace that we're going, or on the exponential trend that we're going, because the same pace would be linear, but if we keep growing at the same rate, then these things will be smarter than us. And by smarter, I mean will be capable of the same level of intellectual ability, and also possibly physical ability with some of the advances in robotics as well. But there's going to be a point here where relatively soon these things are going to be as good as most people at most things. That fundamentally feels different in the sense that that's a world where now if the average person is quote unquote replaceable by a machine, then what is the value of the human, at least in the workforce?
Well, if you pose that question to me, my answer would be creativity, because it still seems to be the one thing that AI lacks is creativity or initiative. And I say initiative because it with the AI that we have, it's all, like it's a chatbot. That's what ChatGPT is. It's a chatbot which you can give instructions to have it complete a task. AI is yet to come to you and be like, I don't know, what can I do for you? Or like it's yet to give you things which you could try and to explore. Like I don't know a whole lot about Snapchat's AI. Like it's like some bot that you have. People were wigging out over it. Maybe it had some function or capability of doing stuff like that. I have no idea. But to me, it's always been interesting because AI seems, at least for now, I don't know. You probably know better than I do. Bounded by what the human mind can give it.
So there's a couple of interesting aspects to what you're talking about here. One is, again, I want to take us away from just thinking about chatbots like AI, generative AI today, the kinds of AI that we're dealing with. Yes, there are language generators, and for the most part, those language generators have been used as chatbots, and that's certainly one mode to interact with them. I think the more important thing to think about, though, there are of course other forms of AI: image generators, video generators, music generators. There's also again the robotics, these robots that can learn and explore their environment and interact with their environment. I've seen demonstrations of these things getting better and better, actually being able to effectively navigate in the world. So we do have to think about all of those different modalities as well as, not just chatbots, and where all of those are going to be again 5-10 years in the future. So if you look at things just from the perspective of today, I see what you're saying. The creativity aspect is tough because, yes, I do wonder about this. This is probably the one question that bothers me the most, is that these machines at the moment are sort of trained on all this data, and their sole goal is to produce like the next most likely thing to come out. And so my question becomes, well, isn't creativity the thing that isn't likely to come next? Isn't it the thing that is definitively not the way we were thinking before? The kind of thinking that got us to where we are is not the kind of thinking that will get us where we need to be in terms of creativity, in terms of how we make new leaps. So, can a machine that is solely designed to predict what's the most likely thing, is there a world in which the most likely next thing is a massive advance based on some creative leap or some intellectual leap, and so it can predict that leap even though it's not necessarily innovating it on its own. It's literally so good at predicting what would come next that it can also predict things that we couldn't have imagined. That's the big question. Can it be creative in that sense?
Well, I mean, given that this is not my big field of expertise, so I'm gonna flip it back onto you, and then I'll give my 2 cents based on that because I'm highly uneducated in this space and I don't just want to blabber. But do you think it can eventually?
Well, I guess my point is that's where I'm kind of stuck. My intuition says no, machines that are built to think the way that we've always thought will never be able to think differently than we've always thought. And yet, these things make advances that we couldn't have predicted. So, will it be able to handle creativity in the sense that even if it's designed as a prediction machine, it can predict so well that it appears as though it is being creative? Maybe. It seems unlikely to me, but I at this point it's hard to rule things out because they are advancing so fast that the capabilities that might emerge are hard to even forecast, to even to try to understand what these models will be capable of in 5 years is tough. I mean, we have ideas, but could it get creative? Maybe. I guess where I want to take this would be the idea of tools versus entities. What I mean is, I think that the way that people conceptualize AI moving moving forward is that it's sort of a human replacement. It will sort of be like humans, and yeah, in certain ways, it will be like humans because it learned from humans. But I think that it's fundamentally wrong to be thinking in these terms. I still think AI will be a tool for humans to leverage to do their work. And I think that it will make us more productive, just like all the other kinds of tools and technologies that we've built up to this point. I think that giving them or treating them like they are somehow entities that want to take over for us is just it's a strange way to place to immediately jump in my mind. I don't go there. I think of them as tools that we leverage to do our jobs better.
I like this because to me, this is the same way my intuition goes. I think that, I mean, this may be linear thinking. We've talked about this, but when you make something with a intended purpose and a set of skills which are made for that purpose, it seems odd that it would deviate so far from it. And I think that human creativity is something that is not replicable by a robot because there are, I don't know about emotion. I don't know what role emotion plays in creativity, but it's there. It's a little more than probably I want to dig into because I'd probably have to pull some stuff out that I haven't thought of yet. But there's no doubt that biases and context and logic would be very hard to try and implement because I think even to me it would be pretty hard to describe what logic is or like like and then trying to implement that into a computer, into a robot would be so complex. I don't even want to try to think about that. But I've mentioned to you this notion before of leverage, and you have used similar terms, but I want to touch on this because I think it's interesting in the sense that what AI will unlock us is a world where our creativity can shine through further because we're not so hung up on trying to do tedious tasks. It offloads the work, right? We talked about this before, but it makes me think of, well, if we start to use AI for all of those tedious tasks and decisions, at what point might it start to catch on if it starts to become more intelligent? Because it may sound odd or stupid, but to me, it would seem interesting that if you have a system which is adaptive and can learn, because you've talked to me about machine learning before. It's still somewhat foreign to me, but it would seem interesting or almost slightly illogical to me that it couldn't eventually get to a place like that. So it's just curious because I think that this reaction of this fear to this unknown is probably warranted and probably somewhat unwarranted because science fiction is a thing, but the unknown will also always be the unknown. So maybe it's something that we haven't even foreseen yet, which to me sort of makes it exciting more so than scary. I don't know if you take that stance like me, but that's where I go.
So there's a lot to break down here, but overall, I would say, I find that the way that reality actually plays out is oftentimes more surprising than even the best science fiction. I think reality has a way of doing things where there's no way that you can anticipate this. And so I think I'm excited to see where things go, but I also understand the concern. And let me see if I can try to address this because you asked earlier a question that got me thinking about how what objectives we give these machines, or then if they can develop their own objectives. And I think that this is where a lot of the debate in AI safety comes up around what if these things suddenly are able to act autonomously based on their own goals, their own objectives, their own interpretations of what is right and wrong. And I think that that is a scary possibility, but something tells me that it's not quite going to play out the way we expect it to. And what I mean by that is, as these things get more and more capable, we have more and more people thinking about the problems, recognizing what is and isn't beneficial, what we do and don't care about, and being more precise about what we build based on better understanding the outcome we want. Does that mean that we can't make mistakes and miss something fundamental, that in trying to build what we want to build, we didn't think this through and somehow it can do things now that we don't want it to do? Sure, it's all possible. But I guess I'm just of the opinion that while it seems like a scarier technology, I would want to believe that even when other forms of technology were coming up and people were afraid of the impact that they would have, that it was just so far beyond what they could conceive of at the time that all they could do was be scared. And so I'm optimistic in the sense that I believe that this technology has the potential to do massive good. And while it may disrupt our way of life, that who's to say our way of life doesn't need a little disrupting?
That sentiment is interesting because I share the excitement, I share the enthusiasm and the hope for it, but that notion that maybe our own way of life needs a little disrupting to me is interesting because of course these are all, subjective opinions and thoughts, but it seems that quite often every once in a while a new revolution comes around, a new invention, a new something comes around, and there's not even a reset, because I think a reset is different, but maybe that's something we touch on in another episode. But there is an evolution, and I think that is part of humans as we are. We have to evolve and we have to adapt to what's around us and what we have. And I think that over time, if there's anything that I've seen, we've become incredibly good at using what we have at our disposal to improve what we already have. I think that human intelligence is a little bit stronger than we want to give it credit for. And the best minds, and even not necessarily the best minds, because I think best is subjective in and of itself, but the brightest, you want to call it the brightest, something like that, somehow find a way to do something which, like you said, like you touched on here, is my belief, something that we haven't even thought of yet. Because it will require non-linear thinking for us to do that, and that's tough for us to do. That's not how our brains are wired. It's why looking at an exponential graph is sometimes weird for some people in a math class. But to me, it's always seemed interesting that at the point we are now, we still know just as little as we did at the point before. Because to me, it would make logical sense. Okay, we're learning more about this technology and how it evolves and where it can go. But yet it seems that we don't. And I think that's sort of the beauty of it. There's this unknown about where it could go and what it can do for us. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think we need to see what it can do for us. And again, try and use it as a tool for us and not let us be a tool for it. Because I think that there's possibly a world where we end up becoming a tool for AI if society comes to a point where it is so numb to some kind of authority or order, or I think order is probably a good way to put it, that it stops relying on other people and it wants to rely on something else. But what's a little bit of fun and skepticism in a conversation when you have something new to come up? I think that it's almost kind of the fun of it.
Well, I think that what you're talking about here is interesting because, for me at least, I think about the idea like what if AI takes all of our jobs? And I go, what if it did? And what if that was okay? In other words, what if we still found a way, like what if the world was just not operating on the same principles that it has been operating on for the past however many years, and suddenly there's a way that we can all not have to do the kind of work that we hate doing. And what I mean by that, not all of us hate our jobs, but I think a lot of us are doing our jobs to pay the bills, to get income, to sustain the lifestyle that we want to have. And do we the question I have is, do we want to be doing that in the first place? Or are there things that we would rather be spending our time on? And then if we had a technology that could allow us to do that, wouldn't that be incredible? And so my mind goes, well, if that was even possible, if that was even a thing that could exist, don't you think that we as a society would do everything possible to figure out how to make that viable, how to make it reasonable for humans to spend more time doing what they want to do and less time doing what they have to do to keep the economy moving the same way? If machines can take over some of the responsibilities that are things that people just don't need to be spending time on, that sounds great. And I understand that this stance is like, okay, that's a lot to ask for, but where does the money to support all this come from? These are important questions. I guess I just tend to be of the opinion that if a revolutionary technology like that is available, we'll figure out how to make the money stuff work.
I agree. I think that with like new tech, eventually there are just adjustments made and adaptations that become more and more normal, and it just sort of becomes an integrated part of life. And it's interesting because it makes me think of the whole notion of a utopia and a dystopia, because again, you and me have talked about this before, not even while the mic's been on, but that neither of those are really realistic or possible. And it makes me think that if people start to see this possibility pop up of, oh, we could have a life where we could do everything that we want, it's like, well, sounds fine and dandy, but then where do the problems arise with that? Because I think that there's good and bad with everything. There are things which will innately help us and things which will innately hurt us with this. So to me, it's a lot of, why speculate when we can take steps forward and not need the speculation in the first place?
Yeah, I think that the the concern people have is, if we keep taking steps forward and we're not being cautious enough, if we're being too aggressive, that we may be able to take a step forward that we can't take back. But to your point, and what I think I'm trying to convey as well, is that I think that what happens is we see a point beyond which we can no longer predict. There's once the world works this way, or let's put it this way: once this technology exists, the world may stop working the way that it has been working, and we can't project farther than that. That's just because we have to see what happens to even know what systems might be effective in that kind of world. We still don't know what we're up against. And This makes it easy for people to say, oh, well, that's the end because I can't see any further than that. So it must be that we either end up in a good place or a bad place. That's the utopia dystopia stuff. It's that I feel like that's why these conversations happen. It feels like if there's an end, well, at the end of a story, it's usually a happy ending or a sad ending. And it's like, okay, so we project this idea of we're going to end up in either the perfect scenario or the absolute worst possible scenario. And I think to your point, there's good and bad to everything. And what we'll end up with is again something in between and something that will have its own problems, its own order that needs to be worked out. And whatever gets worked out there will still have problems and we'll need another revision down the line again. But I think to try to boil things down to, oh, it's either going to end perfectly or in disaster is far too simplistic. The world has just never worked that way. And I don't see any reason why this would be any different. But I want to go back to something else that you said earlier, which I think is the crux of this whole thing for me, which is us using the tool versus letting the tool use us. And I think that that is such the right way to think about this because this is where people are making the mistake. They are thinking of these AI as an authority figure, as some decision maker. But if we maintain that role of the decision makers, of the people who are deciding what direction things move and how we want to apply the technology to make that world better, and we're using them as tools to get the job done, we can be effective and we can produce a world that we would be more happy to live in. But if you start to give up that control and say, aha, I'm going to defer to this system to do it for me. And that's where I come back to this idea of the workforce. It's like, no, don't have the machine do it for you. Have the machine help you do it better than you could have before.
That makes me think of how you have tools to help better yourself. And I think that this is one of the reasons I have enjoyed having AI as a tool for my young formative years and even during school is it's that it won't be better than me at doing any of this because it doesn't have my ideas to go off of. It's so good at doing all of this because I'm able to give it some context, I'm able to give it some direction, and I think that it's able to optimize a lot of the things that we do in ways that we don't think about. Because I know that certainly for myself, something that I struggle with and something that I think a lot about is, well, I know what I have that I can remember that I have. I don't know all the tools that I have at every single moment at my disposal, but I'm sure there are tools that I'm forgetting about. And that's kind of one of the beauties of AI is it'll never forget about any tool that it has. It can make any conjecture, it can grab any formula, it can, do whatever, basically, and it will not necessarily think, it will, come to the dead end or come to some place where it's like, okay, I got to do this. But the human brain doesn't think like that. It's different. It uses a little more abstraction. It's not so algorithmic. It's not so computerized. And I think it's just one of the things which interests me because it shouldn't be, something which makes you cower in fear of, oh Lord, it's gonna just completely wreck everything I have and take everything away. It's like, no, because realistically, what you want is to do the things that you enjoy in life, regardless of whether or not they pay you the most money. You know, you want to live a life which you end up being fulfilled with. There's an old adage which somehow went, if you ask a fisherman why does he not, like a really good fisherman, why does he not, franchise an enterprise and make all of this money and then, come back and relax on the beach with his wife and enjoy some nice food and run around with his kids? He's like, well, because at the end of every day, I can go out and catch the fish that I want for myself. And every day I get to come back and sit on the beach, watch my kids, sit with my wife, and enjoy a meal. So to me, I end up in the same place for a longer time and I don't have to do the work to get there. I think it's interesting to ponder on.
Absolutely. I just, maybe I'll end with something similar that I think about, which is you can imagine two worlds. So let's just take an arbitrary example, like music, AI music generation. Okay. You could use this in a couple of different ways. You could be the kind of person that goes, ah, now I have the secret. All I have to do is prompt it to produce the next hit song, and I can just do this a bunch of times and maybe, like, find ways to test out which one is getting the most appeal. And then suddenly, when I can see that this one is hitting, I can, like, produce that into a bigger song, and then, aha, now I've got my new hit. And now you're deferring to the machine. You're just going, let the machine do all of the thinking for me. And, you know, there might be some people where that works for a little while, and maybe the machines will be able to do a decent enough job. But I think the real way to use the music generation tools I've seen, it's like, I can see how now people who might have been more interested in producing music but weren't that musically talented now have the ability to produce music, even if they aren't necessarily as good at it. And then the ones who are good at it will have the ability to enhance their skills even further. Now you're the person who can use AI to create sounds that you might not have had access to. Maybe you wanted to do, this big orchestral piece, and you just didn't, but you didn't have the money to fund it, or whatever it is. And suddenly now, because you have AI, you can create something that is reminiscent of that or indistinguishable from that, and you can produce the song you wanted, whereas before it would have cost too much money or whatever. And to me, you're still in control, you're still making the decisions, but AI is a tool for you to use that's allowing you to build something you never could before. And in that sense, we could get artists that can produce all kinds of songs. Like, imagine the artists who already produce songs where they can't afford to do basically whatever they want. Imagine giving them the opportunity to say, okay, well, now anything you can imagine, you can do that way cheaper. And so they'll be able to produce all kinds of music that is either even more grand and incredible than what's out there, or even a greater volume of the kind of stuff that they wish they could produce, but just simply don't have the time or money to do.
I think that to round it off, the crux you and me agree on this is that it's something which opens up a world of possibility which we don't yet understand. And I think that it's the word probabilities and opportunities that should be focused on. It's not this whole set of problems or challenges or dangers. It's opportunities, and it's newfound ways in which we're able to execute the things which we did before. Because looking at new innovations with a negative mindset, I believe, sets them up to be a negative thing. However, if we can make developments in the direction which we want to take them, then I think, sort of circling back, we keep our control. We keep it as our tool.
Absolutely. I think that for me, what I would say is I have a lot of hope, and I am I am optimistic, but I would also say that this isn't just a message of, oh, it'll be okay, there's nothing to worry about. I think we should be very cognizant of the potential concerns, be aware of what we do and don't want to happen, and think more clearly and constructively about what we do want, be able to have more conversations with people and understand what world we want to create for ourselves. So all of this is important, but what I want to make sure we get across is that I don't think it's quite as simple as these machines are coming to replace us. I think that there's a world in which things are more complicated than that, and these machines are able to help us, and they may also pose problems that we need to be aware of and engage with. But whatever world we end up with, it will still be one where human ingenuity will be a necessary part of the equation and will be an important part of the productivity of the world, even if that means redefining what exactly productivity means based on changing circumstances.
Oh, it was my last thing. I'm going to circle back to a quote I heard one time. Let your future shape your future and not your past. Focus in this case on what we want AI to do, and be cognizant and aware of what we want it to not do.
Excellent. I think that's all we've got time for today. But you want to take us home?
Absolutely. If you guys enjoyed this episode, you can find more content at The Wrong Idea on Instagram, TikTok, and X. Until next time, have a good one.
Got a thought that challenges the norm? We want to hear it. Post your wrong idea with the hashtag wrong idea. That's RONG idea. And join the conversation. Who knows? Your perspective might just be featured in a future episode. Remember, in a world of endless perspectives, all ideas are wrong ideas. Until next time, keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep embracing the unconventional.